Ever feel like you're just bombarded with information these days? Like you're trying to figure out what's true and what's not even worth your time.
Yeah.
It can be a real struggle, and that's what we're diving into today with Wikiversity's Knowing How You Know.
It's a really cool course.
It is. It's all about building that mental toolkit to navigate like the information overload of the modern world, right?
Exactly. It's about developing that theory of knowledge,
Yeah.
And I know that sounds kind of,
Kind of intense.
yeah, like a philosophy lecture.
Right, right.
It's really not. It's about understanding the often invisible rules that we're already using to decide what we believe.
It's like those unspoken assumptions we have.
Exactly. And spoiler alert, just going with, whatever feels good at the moment.
Oh, yeah. That's my specialty.
Right. Not the most reliable strategy.
Not a recipe for like a nuanced worldview.
Not at all.
Okay, so the course starts off with this question that honestly threw me a little bit. It asks, do you believe in alien abductions?
It's a good one, right?
It's out there.
It gets you thinking.
It really does.
Because it forces you to think about how you decide what you believe in the first place.
Totally.
And a lot of the time, we rely on some pretty shaky foundations.
Like what? Give me an example.
Blindly trusting friends or authorities or even just, the loudest voice in the room.
Oh, I'm guilty of that last one for sure.
Right.
If someone's argument is loud enough, I'm like, okay, you win. But seriously, what's so bad about trusting those around us? Isn't that like how we learn as kids?
Of course. I mean, we're social creatures. We learn from each other.
Right.
But the key takeaway here is that our brains, they crave certainty,
Oh, yeah. We don't like uncertainty.
Even if it means clinging to beliefs that aren't really well supported, like we naturally gravitate toward information that just confirms what we already think, right?
Yes. So we create these little echo chambers.
Exactly.
So if I'm like vehemently anti-pineapple on pizza,
Okay.
I shouldn't just surround myself with my fellow pineapple haters.
Right. You need to actively seek out those dissenting opinions.
Even if it pains me to hear them.
Especially if it pains you to hear.
Okay, I'm hearing you. But this isn't really about, like, the right or wrong answer when it comes to pizza toppings, is it?
No, it's bigger than that.
It's about.
It's about building a more robust system for evaluating information in general.
And that's got to be even harder online, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Where it's so easy to just curate a feed that's like an echo chamber of our own biases.
It's true. It's like an endless feedback loop. And I think the source really drives home our responsibility to be like critical consumers of information, no matter where we encounter it.
Be a little more discerning.
Yes.
So how do we actually do that? Like, how do we go about building this more conciliant view of reality that the course talks about?
Okay, so that's where the source introduces these three categories of knowledge.
Ooh, categories. I love a good category.
Right, so we've got matters of fact, matters of taste, and matters of controversy.
Okay, so like levels of certainty.
You could say that.
Like
Yeah.
some things are just true, period. End of story.
Exactly. Those are what we call matters of fact. They're verifiable. Like, think of scientific laws.
Okay, yeah.
The boiling point of water.
It makes sense.
You can't really debate gravity. It's just is.
Exactly. So those are our
The
foundation.
foundation of a conciliant worldview.
Okay, so what about the stuff that's a little more, subjective?
Okay, so that gets us to matters of taste, right?
Like my undying love for 80s hair metal.
Exactly. And this is where it gets interesting, because the course highlights how often we mistake our own personal preferences for objective truth.
I am very guilty of that.
Right. But like chocolate or vanilla,
Oh, see, now you're speaking my language.
there's no objectively right answer there. It's just a matter of taste.
I used to think my taste in music was like objectively superior, like I was some kind of, musical savant. Not so much.
We've all been there. But that's what's so great about this framework. It helps us navigate those gray areas.
Yeah, it keeps us humble.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got facts on one end, personal preference on the other.
Yeah.
What's that third category? Matters of controversy. What's that all about?
So that's where things get a little more complex. That's where even the experts might disagree.
Okay.
Think about solutions to, big social issue, economic policy, that kind of thing.
The big messy stuff.
Exactly.
And the knowing how you know course. Does it, tell us how to solve those.
Well, it gets really meta here because it basically says that these controversies, while incredibly important,
Right.
they fall outside of a strict theory of knowledge.
So how are we supposed to navigate those if our, shiny new knowing how you know toolkit can't give us the answer.
That's the million-dollar question. And the source really emphasizes strong critical thinking skills in those situations.
Which is tough,
It is tough.
especially these days.
It's about being able to evaluate different perspectives,
Hmm.
understanding the underlying assumptions, and being open to the possibility that there might not be one right answer.
There might not be, but my brain wants one answer.
I know, right?
Oh, man. Okay, so speaking of tricky things, the source uses this fascinating example. It's an optical illusion.
Yes. With the lines,
With
right?
the lines. It's messing with my head.
I know. You see it, you can measure it,
It doesn't make sense.
but your brain's telling you it's not true,
And the source uses that to show how easily our perception can be fooled.
even when we think we're being objective.
Yeah. Okay, so before we jump into that, let me set the scene for our listeners. Imagine, if you will, a series of perfectly straight horizontal lines.
Okay, yeah, I'm picturing.
Simple enough, right?
Yeah.
But here's where it gets weird.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
These lines, they're set against a background that makes them look like totally wonky.
Like they're bending or something.
Exactly, like bending inwards.
Even though they're not.
Even though they're not. You can like measure it out, you can trace it with your finger.
And it still looks off.
It's so trippy. I was staring at this thing in the source material like, am I seeing things? But it just shows you how easily our brains can be tricked.
Even with something as basic as a straight line, right?
It's wild. It makes you realize, like, we don't always see things as they actually are.
And that's the whole point, right? We can't just rely on our gut feeling or those first impressions.
Got to go deep.
We need a system for checking those perceptions against something a little more, objective.
It's like you wouldn't just eyeball it if you were building a house, right? You'd use a level, you'd measure things out.
Exactly.
So how do we do that with, like, our beliefs? Do we need to carry around, like, a mental ruler or something?
I mean, there's no physical tool for this, unfortunately.
Hmm.
But that's where this whole knowing how you know framework comes in.
Okay, so it's like mental exercises, things like that.
It's about developing those critical thinking muscles, learning to spot the biases and assumptions that might be skewing our perception.
Oh, okay, I see.
Like, think of it like calibrating your own mental instruments.
I like that. So it's about being more aware of those internal biases, those mental shortcuts.
Exactly. Because we all have them, right?
Oh, for sure.
It's how our brains make sense of this crazy, complex world. But we have to be able to recognize when those shortcuts might be leading us astray.
And how do we do that?
It takes practice.
Hmm.
And it takes being willing to question our own assumptions.
So the questioning part is always tough.
I know, right? But it's essential.
Because otherwise we're just stuck in our own little echo chambers.
And we never really grow.
We're never challenged.
Exactly. So we have to actively seek out those different perspectives,
Even if they make us uncomfortable.
especially if they make us uncomfortable. Because it's in those moments when we encounter information that really challenges us.
Yeah,
That's where the real learning happens.
that's how we grow.
We can either solidify our existing understanding, or even better, we can expand it.
That can be kind of scary though, right? Like
Oh.
letting go of a belief you've held onto for a long time.
It can be, but it can also be really liberating.
Okay, I can see that.
Because if we're holding on to beliefs that are no longer serving us,
Yeah.
it's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole.
So much friction.
It creates all this internal friction, that dissonance.
Oh, I felt that.
It can be so uncomfortable.
It's true. There's this one time I had to completely change my stance on something. It was a pretty big issue, and I was like adamant about being right.
We've all been there.
But it was like this whole part of my worldview was being called into question.
Right. It shakes you up a bit.
It was terrifying at first, but once I actually sat with it, I examined the evidence, I listened to different perspectives. It was like this huge weight lifted off of me.
That's the power of being open to new information.
Yeah. It's amazing. I realized that holding on to that old belief, it wasn't doing me any favors. It was actually holding me back.
And that's what this knowing how you know course is all about.
Okay.
It's not about throwing out everything you believe and starting from scratch.
No one wants to do that.
It's about recognizing that knowledge is a process.
Always learning, always growing.
Exactly. And that we have to be willing to adjust our sails, as we encounter new information.
Which sometimes means admitting we were wrong.
Ooh,
which
yeah.
is like the hardest thing in the world to do
It
sometimes.
goes against our nature, right?
It really does. But I think that's where this whole intellectual humility thing comes in, which the source talks about a bit.
Oh, that's a good one.
It's like recognizing that we don't have all the answers.
And being open to the possibility that we might be wrong.
What?
And I think a big part of that is approaching new information with a healthy dose of skepticism.
Not like skepticism towards everything.
Right. Not like a knee-jerk, I don't believe anything kind of skepticism, but a skepticism of our own assumptions.
Oh, I like that distinction.
Like, what am I bringing to the table here?
Am I being objective?
How might my own biases be coloring my perception?
It's tough to do, but so important.
It is tough, but it's a muscle we can develop over time.
So, more mental exercises.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm up for the challenge. So, we're all works in progress, constantly learning and growing and,
And messing up sometimes.
oh, for sure, making mistakes is part of the process, right?
Absolutely. We learn from our mistakes.
And then we apply those lessons to, the never-ending quest for knowledge.
Yes. It's a journey, not a destination.
Speaking of journeys, there's this other part of the source material that really got me thinking.
Okay, what's that?
The unity of knowledge. Have you heard of this?
Oh, yeah. The idea that all reliable knowledge should ultimately point towards like a unified understanding of the world.
Right, like it should all fit together somehow.
Exactly. A cohesive and consistent understanding.
But that feels kind of daunting, doesn't it?
It can feel that way. Because the world is messy.
Yeah, it is.
There's always new information emerging.
People disagree all the time.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
not about forcing everything into a rigid framework or pretending that we have all the answers.
Okay, good, because I don't have all the answers.
Yeah, neither. No one does.
So then what is it about?
It's about striving for coherence in our understanding.
Coherence. I like that.
It's about recognizing when something we encounter, clashes with our existing knowledge,
When something doesn't quite fit.
and then asking ourselves, okay, what do we do with this?
It's like, do we try to just like shoehorn it in there? Or,
Force it to fit, even if it doesn't belong.
yeah, or do we like reevaluate? Do we say, okay, maybe my understanding needs a little tweaking?
Right. Because sometimes that clash is a sign that we need to update our thinking.
So it's less about having this like perfectly airtight worldview,
And more about being open to revising and updating as we go.
like installing a software update, but for our brains.
I love that analogy. Because it really is an ongoing process, right?
It never stops,
We're constantly learning, refining our understanding.
which is kind of exciting, but also, maybe a little terrifying if you're someone who likes to feel like they have all the answers.
Oh, for sure. But honestly, wouldn't you rather have a belief system that's like evolving and adapting to new information?
Instead of one that just like crumbles the moment it encounters something it can't explain.
Exactly. It's about building that resilience.
So what I'm hearing is knowing how you know, it's not about memorizing facts. It's not about winning arguments.
It's so much bigger than that.
It's about being like more conscious in our approach to information.
More deliberate.
Yeah, and more critical.
Absolutely. Of ourselves and the information we encounter.
And maybe even a little more humble, right?
100%. That intellectual humility thing we were talking about.
Yeah, recognizing that we don't have it all figured out.
And that's okay.
It's more about the journey than the destination, right?
Exactly. It's about embracing that journey of lifelong learning.
With all the uncertainty that comes with it.
The uncertainty is part of what makes it so exciting.
I'm starting to see that.
Keeps us curious, keeps us engaged.
And it's not something we do alone.
Right. We're
Yeah.
constantly interacting with others, exchanging ideas, challenging each other's perspectives.
And that's where those like aha moments happen.
Yes, those shifts in perspective that completely change the way you see things.
Like you've just leveled up your understanding of the world.
Exactly. And those moments, they're what make this whole pursuit of knowledge so rewarding.
So to wrap things up, for our listener who's maybe feeling a little overwhelmed by all this talk of knowing how you know,
It's a mouthful, isn't it?
it is. But it's important stuff. Here's the takeaway. It's an ongoing practice. It's about cultivating that intellectual humility, questioning your assumptions, and being open to different perspectives.
And don't be afraid to dive into those uncomfortable conversations, those moments of dissonance.
Those are the moments that really make us think.
And they're the moments that often lead to the most growth.
Absolutely. And if you're looking for a great place to start, check out the full Knowing How You Know course on Wikiversity.
It's a fantastic resource, packed with insights and exercises.
So, until next time, happy exploring and keep those minds open.
Here's to lifelong learning.
And on that note, we'll catch you on the next deep dive.